Namaste. Beautiful souls, welcome back to my deck collection series. And as I like to refer to it, this is my library of tarot decks. I really do come from a place of, rather than a collector, a place of decks I want to work with and study and learn, expand my knowledge of the tarot. And in this video, I'm going to share with you a number of historic decks. I'm going to approach this by region, and then I will share with you a selection of contemporary iterations of the Tarot de Marseille and so on. So welcome. The deck I'm going to start with today is the newest one in my library, the Tarocchi di Matronua by Valentina De Luca. And I just want to point out that Matronua is a brand that Valentina has created. And if I read it right in her Kickstarter campaign, that her intention is to create more decks. And the one that we are looking at is Tarocchi Italiana, created by hand, painted by hand by this very, very talented artist and, dare I say, tarologist as well. I have read with this deck. I find it simply, it's so luscious. It's so luscious and rich in its art, of course, in its art, but also in its intention. The few cards that I have on the table here are extra cards. So there is an additional Devil card, Hermit, Love, and Star card, or Moon card, I should say. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about these. Part of my journey with the tarot, it really is one of study. And I believe all of this builds layers, depth to my work as a reader and a spiritual counselor, supporting many of you on your journeys. And the information, the pages, the books, the rabbit holes that I find myself going down, it's so very, very brilliant. And I was looking at this Diavolo, and remember that the Devil card was not included in a lot of the older decks. It's somewhat of a newer edition, but this one is particularly intriguing. You can see the ribbons coming down from the sides of the mask. There is a breath of fire emerging from the mouth, horns on the mask, and indeed we are working with a mask as well as mask on the knees, the shoulders, and the belly. There is a bit of an animal nature in the claws as well as the fur in the suit and the wings. And there's definitely something here about the notion of a costume. And I think that really is an energy that could be worked with beautifully in a reading, more so than a more familiar contemporary Diavolo, Devil card. And I just pulled out a couple of other ones, and I will be sharing some Minchiati decks in a little bit here. And you can see here something very similar in the Minchiati Tarot. I believe both of these are earlier Minchiati decks. And then the other cards here, this one is much more familiar. I know that we have the Time card in Minchiati, and this was carried forward in some other, I even believe, some contemporary decks, such as the Chamonix Tarot by Eden Gallanter. I know we do have a Time card, and Father Time replacing the Hermit in many cards is a really interesting way to work with this particular arcanum. And here's a very similar one from, I believe, Minchiati Florentine. The only difference being that Il Tempo has wings in this particular deck. And another energy that I think in working with some of these decks is to contemplate the difference in energy. So we have love versus lovers, which gives this particular arcanum a different nuance. And if you're familiar with the Tarot de Marseille, we have 3 figures in the Tarot de Marseille. And in this alternate card here, Valentina has selected a love card with 2 and Cupid overhead. And this one does not match a Minchiate pattern where the groom is kneeling and being crowned by the woman on the right. Cupid here is definitely piercing the energy of the groom, shall we call him. And then this one, so interesting here. So this is the moon card. And the other card that I do have in the deck is very familiar with the 2 towers, the pathway, and the animals. But here we have the spindle and the distaff. And if you look in the distance, there is an ocean in the distance. The colorations are absolutely beautiful. And there's certainly a great deal of contemplation that goes into this particular work that this woman is doing. So we're really picking up on reflection, work with a purpose. There's a connection to the earth. Her right foot, it's really interesting that that right foot is forward. And this card may be familiar. This is the Tarot de Jacques Vieville. This is the Flornoy restoration, and you can see that we have something similar in the Sun card. And depending on which version of the Jacques Vieville you have, you might have the left hand or the right hand on the front. And I'm going to show you this deck in more detail in just a little bit. This is the Tarocchi della Luna Bolognese deck, and this was restored by the Tarocchi Museum in Italy. And you'll see here also in the Sun card, we see the female figure. In this case, this one, whether this is masculine or feminine, I suppose is up for debate, but also the Sun card, not the Moon card. So there's a lot of questions here, a lot to be worked with. And interestingly, so in the older Bolognese decks, we have kind of a similar devil card. And this one appears less so to me. Well, perhaps it's a mask rather than a figure. But this one where did it go? This one most certainly has that energy of putting something on. And whether it's to create a power or for protective reasons, that's always an interesting question to ask. And then we have here the love card, and quite a different energy. I love the fountain between. Lots could be implied with that. Also, we could look at this as a two cups between. And then here we do have wings on this time card. So I just thought I would start with that and show you some of these connections. So let's begin a journey through the Italian decks in my library. And this truly magnificent deck, it is oversized, uncoated paper, simply brilliant. If you are a fan of working with fabrics and costuming and tarot decks, this one most definitely will not disappoint. Simply stunning. And I have to say, I've done readings with it a couple of times, just read so beautifully, and I was able to pick up on all kinds of connections to the inquiries. And here you see a more familiar looking love card, Il Caro. Another wonderful feature of this deck, and it is detailed in the Kickstarter campaign, which I was not a part of. I was very fortunate. I contacted Valentina De Luca after the campaign had closed and was still able to purchase one of the last decks. But in the Kickstarter campaign, she does talk about the faces that she used in this deck, and they were painted from live or photographs of people that she knows. And this water wheel, you can just imagine the sound of the wheel turning. It is so lifelike, such stunning artwork. And I particularly like this Hanged Man. If you're familiar with the energy of the Hanged Man, and that many of these outcasts, if you will, were hung outside the city walls in the wild, so to speak, where the wildlife could get to them. And I really feel that energy. I know in contrasting Hanged Man cards in the older decks, sometimes you will definitely see that the Hanged One is on display within the walls of the city. But this is a deck that it's just absolutely luscious, and so grateful to have this in my tarot library. This is Marco Benedetti's restoration of the Tarocchi of Giuseppe Metelli, and this may be one of the most precious decks in my tarot library. Marco Benedetti has endeavored to make the restorations that he has created to be usable tarot decks. So the Metelli tarot did not contain, I believe it was the 2 to 5 in the minor suits, and those have been recreated. But this deck, it's something about the brilliance of the color, and the images just seem to pop off the paper. We have the Rivesaltes edges, the hand-folded edges that highlight the colors in the deck, in the cards. This may not look like a familiar tarot. It's certainly one that requires a little bit of study to dive into. I would say there are closer connections to the Minchiate tarot than contemporary tarot. Yet this is certainly a deck that one could read with now that it has 78 cards. And for example, here we have 2 emperors and 2 popes, standing emperor, seated emperor, standing pope, and seated pope. And whether these characters are all male or female, there's somewhat of a hint of a feminine nature here. There's all kinds of layers that one can build in, taking the time to reflect on what we're looking at in these stunning paintings. And the colors that Marco has added to this deck are simply beyond. And I hope that the colors show up on the camera as brilliantly as I see them with my eye. Strength or fortitude, fortune, fortuna. The old man here is justice, and the devil here slaying this dragon. And I love that metaphor. This reminds me of some of the, there's certain contemporary decks that really use this kind of energy, slaying one's demons. And I connect deeply to this card. Very different star card. Star, moon, and sun. And the world. And a lot of these older decks, we have the angel card that follows the world card. The minors do not disappoint. The aces are simply stunning. Appreciate the white space. Oh my goodness, I have to show you this one. This is the Cavalier of Cups. And I just find it so charming. It's the only one that is facing in this direction. Yeah. So this is Marco Benedetti's restoration of the Metelli tarot. What I will do in the description box below is not only list the decks, I will also give you an indication of when the deck was initially published. I am fortunate to have 2 Marco Benedetti decks in my tarot library, and this is Marco's personal Visconti Madrone, And it is personal because, again, there are additional cards to flesh it out as a working tarot deck. This was created in Rome, in July 2024. And these small cards are just a delight to hold in hand. I've put everything back in order. And I suppose I'm not sure in the older decks if this one should follow the final arcanum, but it's placed here for now. This is the Fool card. In the Visconti Madrone, there are only, I believe, 11 major arcana that were surviving. And so in order to have a 78 card tarot, many of these had to be borrowed from other Visconti decks, paintings, and so forth. And it just feels so fluid. The Empress is an original card. The first three are not. And yet the cards that are created to flush this out as a 78 card deck feel like they perfectly belong. Marco Benedetti is an incredibly talented deck creator. And this love card, this marriage card, wedding card, perhaps one of the most beautiful in this deck. I think the World card is also one of my favorite. And I do love the Tower and the star, the sun, and the moon. And you can probably recognize this one from the Soprafino Tarot. And here's Diana. And this card, I believe, comes from his Metalli Tarot. And here you see the beautiful Judgment, Angel card, and the World card. The minors are somewhat illustrated, incredibly rich in golds and blues. The colors seem to rise above the page. Very interesting how I believe the silver content in the paint created some darker colorations on the paper of the original images. And something really interesting about this deck is that actually this is not a 78 card deck. This is a much bigger deck, 90 card Tarocchi, because there are 6 court cards for each suit. We have a male and a female page, a male and a female knight, and a king and a queen. So this deck is verging on the size of a Minchiate deck. The aces are just beautiful. And here you have, again, 6 court cards. A little tricky in this deck to differentiate between the bâton and the swords. And you may be able to see here there is a point. So the bâtons are actually arrows, and the swords, you can see the shape here. Of course, they're not bowed, in an older style, looking more like bâton. The personal Madrone of Marco Benedetti. This is the Fine della Torre that was restored by the International Tarocchi Museum in Italy. Another uncoated deck. These are very large cards. They are tall and an absolute pleasure to sit with the artwork. You'll see that the colors in this deck are of a most sort of unusual palette, very soft, the pinks and the greens. And let's just have a look at a few cards here. I have been really intrigued with the symbols up at the top, sometimes looking like suns and moons, and been able to read into those inclusions. Justice. This is a 78 card tarot, and I believe there were cards that were added to this one as well. The Popes. I showed this card quite a bit when I did my Tarot of Marseille series. I looked at a lot of older decks. And of course, this is not a Tarot de Marseille. It's an older Italian deck out of Bologna. And I don't know if you can hear, but the uncoated paper makes such a beautiful sound. And the intensity of color does vary, and I think that is perhaps an accurate portrayal of the quality of the cards, some of them being in better shape. For the team to restore. And there are several creators, deck creators, who have restored this one. I know Marco Benedetti also has a Fine della Torre. I have never had it in hand, seen it on screen. But this one is just a delight. There are no titles on the cards. Some of the cards you will see a number, others not. And it appears as if these were added at some point, maybe as an afterthought, not by the restorer of the tarot, but one of the older, early versions of the tarot. Fortitude. Fine della Torre, restored by the International Museum of Tarot in Italy. And here are two Il Meneghello decks. On the left is the Sopraffino Tarot, and on the right is the Tarot of Giovanni Vacetta. This little tarot is one that, again, feels a lot like having an art gallery in hand. Such beautiful paintings with a antique look to them. And here we have Il Soleil, the energy of love. And this one does look like, in the Minor Arcana, a Tarot of Marseille. Fonti di Bastoni, King of Cups, Judgment. Such beautiful art. And this would be some of the art that inspired Valentina De Luca in her contemporary Italian tarot, the Matronua that I showed you at the beginning. I believe this is one of the decks that she talks about in her Kickstarter campaign. It really does. It kind of transports me back in time to another place, somewhere that is hard to reach without looking at art such as this. Il Meneghello's Sopraffino Tarot. Here are two copies of the Vacetta Tarot. The left is the Il Meneghello publication, and on the right is a mass market version. I know this one comes in a number of languages, and the publisher is Ankh, A-N-K-H. And you can see that the two decks have been colored in quite a different style. The Il Meneghello deck is richer in color, and it appears as if the deck published by Ankh has a filter of sorts over it, slightly blurring the intensity of the artwork. But both are true to the work of Giovanni Vacetta. And I think at some point I will be doing a number of side-by-sides of many of these decks. I also have a black and white version of this deck, and I think it's really a great exercise to look at this deck with and without color. There is something about the Italian tarots that has a lushness and a richness. Yeah, there's an opulence, and there is just a very different feel than working with Tarot de Marseille or a Wade Smith deck or anything else. They are truly unique unto themselves. I like the Tarot of the Master. The Vachetta Tarot is also called the Tarot of the Master. There are a lot of nuances in this deck that have brought forth special understanding of the cards to me. You can see here that this hanged one is just at the outskirts of the town wall. And just a quick look at the minors. Something about this deck and the more detailed illustration in the minor arcana is kind of brilliant, and I find brings in a layer of meaning that you're not going to find in a Tarot de Marseille. 4 court cards. And some very interesting and equally entertaining minors in the Vachetta Tarot. While the medieval Scapini Tarot probably should be in the last section with contemporary tarots, I feel that it deserves to be here. It is such a beautiful contemporary mass market version of old Italian tarot. The layers of the paintings are simply stunning, and many very unique cards. And depending on the level of your collection of older Italian decks, you might not see cards like this anywhere else. It feels like I'm walking into a fairy tale out of time. I actually prefer to use this deck than a contemporary fairy tale deck because it's based on something that, not that fairy tales aren't based on things that really happened or lessons that we should be aware of, but there's something more historical, shall we say, in working with a deck such as this. I mean, this Queen of Coins, just look at her. I'll take this Queen of Coins anytime over some of the more contemporary Queens of Pentacles that I have in my library. Diana, the birth of Diana. Birth of Diana is used in many decks, many Italian decks, for either the Moon or the Queen of Cups. And you will not see Tarot de Marseille patterns in the minors. Fully illustrated, though not in the same way that the courts or the majors are. And this is U.S. Games Medieval Scapini Tarot. All right, let's turn to the Minchiate Tarot, one that I would love to do several videos on in a more extended series. Find this deck really fascinating. More so than learning to play the game, I am intrigued with finding ways to use this as a reading deck. Because I have been working with astrological correspondences, I'm very curious about how I might incorporate this particular deck with the 12 zodiacal cards into my readings. And we have, of course, 7 virtues included in the 98 card tarot Minchiate, as well as other changes in the deck. And this one is one of the ones from Lo Scarabeo's Anima Antiqua series. This is the Minchiate al Signo. This is the same series, Minchiate Florentine. Both of them are quite extraordinary. Now this, I believe, is early pattern. This one is later pattern. and definitely worthwhile exploring both versions of cards and checking out Musings by Masha's. I will link her series below. She has done a series called Mesmerized by Minchiate, and there is so much to reflect upon in these cards. This one has a lovely feel to it. The card quality is quite luscious, and even though there are 98 cards in the pack, quite easy to shuffle. Prudence. Learning to incorporate all of these energies into a reading and a way to work with these. And I'm thinking that a spread such as the Romani spread, 21 card spread, something like that, would work really well with these large decks. And we have the 4 elements, fire, water. I'm sure you know these cards. Yeah, and the 4 Minchiati decks that I have. So this is early, the early pattern, and I believe these 3 are all later pattern Minchiate. This one is early. This is the restored Minchiate Tarot by Emmanuel IJJ and Isabel Natalini, a very, shall I say, wise pair of tarologists. And the story behind this deck it's really beautiful how they were captivated by this deck in a museum and then found a way to create it and touch up the drawings and paint it. I believe the restoration was about eight hours per card, and I'm sure in some of these decks, I can't imagine this process, the details, the time that went into restoring old tarots. This is a small deck in hand, like the 2 decks from Lo Scarabeo's Anima Antiqua series, following the classic order or reordering in the Minchiate Tarot, because we have more cards, different numbers. And I do have, interesting to me, a theory on the order of the zodiacal cards. And I have been sitting with that and reflecting on that. And this is why I want to do a series and do some sharing. So this is Lo Scarabeo Mass Market Tarot Florentine. It's a lot clearer than the El Signo version. And very interesting couple of cards here. So we have Devil and House of the Devil instead of Devil and Tower. This is the water card. So this would be Florence. And as in one of the Marco Benedetti decks that I shared with you, the reason that some of the backgrounds are red is because these cards carried more points in the game of Minchiate. What was I going to say here? Oh, yes. So we have the Angel card is the final major arcana. I suppose the Fool is the last. The Fool comes after that. But we have World, and then Angel, and then Fool. I believe I showed you the minors in the other one. But in the Minchiate Tarot, there are little animals and some other details in some of the cards. The knights are all half man, half animal. And the design on wands, cups, swords are crossed, but wands and cups, very similar to Tarot de Marseille. And this one's a lot easier to distinguish, swords and wands. And if you're wanting to choose a deck as a reading deck, you might want to have one where you're not going to mix up the wands and the the wands and the swords. If I were going to use a guidebook to refer to the meanings of the cards, the historical energies of the cards, this is the Bamarzo Tarot by Amparo Aguirre. sorry for the pronunciation of the name, a wealth of knowledge in her PDF guidebook. And I would say that between that guidebook and the guidebook that comes with the restored Minchiate Tarot, mind you, it is in French, so you have to work in translation if you don't read French. There is so much to absorb and reflect upon. And there are other resources available too. And I think that Masha, Musings by Masha, does a great job in sharing all of those. So be sure to check out her channel if you are interested in exploring the Tarot Minchiate. This is such a vivid, brightly colored deck. So this would be Bamarzo, Italy. And I love that the minors are color-coded. And you can see that the colors change from ace. Sorry, some of these are upside down. That's a beautiful Fool card. Have a look at that. Ace to the 10. The ace being the most intense, which is often done differently in some decks. You know how some tarot decks have the 10 being the most colorful and the smaller numbers not so much? Now, if it seems a little overwhelming to work with a Minchiate deck where you have to relearn the order of the major arcana, then one of these inspired by Minchiate decks might be an easier place to begin. In the center is the Minchiate Tarot by Brigh. I'm sure you've seen other decks from this particular publishing house. And at first I was quite surprised at this deck because it has a contemporary order and Minchiate style illustrations. So you can see that we have a Grand Duke looking pose and style for the second arcanum. Same for the first. Emperor of the East and West, but they're called Empress and Emperor. And these all come in more familiar order. And that may be very appealing and easier for some to work with. So even though this is not the number for the Hermit in the Tarot Minchiate, it's a more familiar number for those reading with more contemporary tarot. And yet this deck does include all of the extra cards. The cards that have a red background have a red background. So these final cards of the major arcana, except these are all red. I'm not sure that they're supposed to be. All of the virtues are here. And then we have a few red cards in the zodiacal cards. And I haven't checked all of these that it matches perfectly. This is again why I want to dive into this a little bit more fully to see if this is actually a workable deck or if it changes things up too much. And I believe, let me just check here. Yeah, no, the order of the zodiacal cards here is different than in the Minchiate, and the Fool looks like a Fool. And something quite unique to this particular deck is that there are upright and reversed keywords on all of the minors, and it looks quite authentic in the Minchiate style. And where these keywords come from, and I do need to take time to study them to see if they are historically accurate, but I'm looking at this here, upright, 3 of Swords, sorrow. That feels like it's building on more contemporary 3 of Swords kind of meanings and so forth, which is something that indeed I don't want to do. And you can see here 4 of Swords is resting, so that's building in sort of Waite Smith meanings to an older historical deck. For me, that's a bit of a problem. And what I mean by that is when I'm working with a historical deck, I want to do my best to understand the historical energy of the deck and not bring in too a much adaptation because I don't have the energy or the time to study what they mean. And that doesn't mean when I pick up a new deck, I won't be working from all that I already know about the tarot, but I want to put some time and energy into decks that have different systems and come from different centuries. This is Michael J.O.J.'s El Cento Tarot. Beautiful colored deck. Really kind of appeals to me. I do like a color-coded deck, and I think it makes things a lot easier to work with. You can see the majors are all purple, high-frequency purple. The wands are red, the cups are blue, the swords are yellow, and the coins are green. And like the deck that I just showed you, this has contemporary names. It is in a familiar order, and it does not, I would say that this one is less so looking like an historic tarot. For the most part, it's very interesting death card. It looks closer to a Golden Dawn inspired deck than a historic deck. And then I turn over a card that does look like an older card. It's quite funny. I like the sense of humor in some of these cards, and it feels almost like a cartoon quality to the artwork. There are some original extra majors, and there are some of the cards you would expect to see in a tarot, minchiate, such as Prudence. The dragon's very interesting. Hope, Faith, and Charity, and the 12 zodiacal cards. There are actually extra zodiac cards here. Ophius is here, I believe. I love that Capricorn is the sea goat instead of Capricorn. That's wonderful. The water bearer, and yet you can see the Aquarius symbol here. And I'm excited to, this deck came out in 2024, I believe. I'm excited to work with this deck and find ways to play with. And I don't mean in a game. I mean having fun with doing readings with larger expanded decks. Why is the Dinosaurs of Marseille here? This particular deck is here. It is not Italian. Neither is El Cento Tarot. It's not El Cento Tarot. It's El Cento Tarot. But they are here because I'm sharing with you minchiate inspired decks. I kind of like this deck, and I think that the creatrix, Anastasia Kashian, did a wonderful job in incorporating the energy of each of the dinosaurs into the archetype of the major arcana. Surprisingly brilliant little deck. And I have a soft spot in my heart for dinosaurs. They were a part of my childhood from the time I was 6 years old, and I learned not all, but most of the dinosaur names and characteristics of dinosaurs, and I've always loved their energy. And then, okay, so, this is really interesting. So instead of the sun, we have Natural Selection as the title of the card. All right, now this one does the extra cards a little bit differently. So we have planets instead of zodiacal signs. So this is the Combat of Mars. There's the Mercury card, the Clarity of Jupiter, Saturn, and then there are Virtue cards. And instead of element cards, we have 4 season cards. And instead, so we have, what are these called? These are the humors, right? We have humors. So sanguinity, melancholy, phlegmatism. There is a happy squirrel card, so that is one of her unique additions. There's the Fool. And the minors are kind of fun. So we have the bones here for the wands. I believe. The bones are the wands. The ferns are the swords. And the sea cards are really beautiful. Swords are ferns. And then the coins are ammonite. And this is the Dinosaurs of Marseille that has a significant number of additional cards. I don't think it comes quite up to 98, but certainly a deck that is inspired by the Tarot Minchiate. And now we turn to Switzerland. Surprisingly, I have very few Swiss decks in my library. This is an Yves Reynaud restoration of the Gassman Tarot, one of my favorite restored decks. And here are two versions of the one IJJ Swiss. This is the readily available version with the English titles. And I really do like the colors on this deck. I love the minor arcana, the embellishments in the minors I find kind of inspirational. I love the way that they read. And I've put away this version because I was fortunate to find a version with the French titles in at a flea market. I believe it was last summer. And I like the feel of the paper, the French titles. There's just something about having this older version of the deck in hand that feels really good. A little piece of history here. Kind of looks like the Gassman Tarot. We do not have Juno and Jupiter in the Gassman Tarot. I love the cleanness, the white background. I actually prefer it to the antique filters that get put on these older decks if they're not reproductions with natural, darker backgrounds. And there's something about this deck. There's a few cards that do this where you really do see a above and a below version of the story. I think in the Moon card as well. Love. Definitely got that energy of love and the sun, and I like that about the older decks. Here I use the Moon. It's a great card. So this is the one IJJ Swiss, and this is the Gassman Tarot, reproduction by Yves Reynaud. I really like this deck. The colors, some of the faces are a bit odd, but there's something about this deck. I'd say that this is in my top two of, I'll put this in the Tarot de Marseille category because all of the cups and swords and whatnot are in the same pattern. But this, of course, is a Swiss deck. And I really do. I like the aces. There's a slight fading to the colors that works really well. I love the choices of the blues and the greens. They really speak to me. The woodcuts are clear. I mean, the details in this Cavalier of Coins is really, really something. Look at this. I mean, the aces in this, I don't think there is another deck where the aces really, I don't know, jump out in this way, in this style of deck. There's so many things about these older decks that I really, really like. I love how the Hermit fills up the card. Very different feeling. There's maybe this sounds kind of weird, but I feel really close to this deck. It connects with me in a very hard to understand way. All right, so from here, we are going to go to France to Tarot de Marseille. The next three decks I am sharing with you are restorations by the late Jean-Claude Flornoy. The Noblet Tarot, this is a favorite among Tarot de Marseille readers. A very classic tarot from the late 17th century. and one that I believe a tarot collection is not without. To pick up this deck and to read with it is to truly be in a place of tarot, a place where tarot began. It has quite a different feel from the Italian decks I shared with you earlier. There is a simplicity to the white background. The lines are so clear. And it just kind of feels like getting down to business. Some people are more comfortable with the more contemporary Tarot de Marseille decks, and so I will pull this one out and often share it with tarot students and do readings with it. And I feel like, this really kind of cuts to the chase. And I absolutely love reading with a tarot deck, such as the Jean Noblet Tarot, and really glad that I have 3 restorations by Flornoy in my tarot library. This is his Dodal large cards. And, this one is kind of a love-hate relationship with the funny faces. But again, this is such a classic tarot and one that I feel it's hard to describe. There's, like I said, there's an honesty, a simplicity to what this represents and where the tarot began. And I know that there are earlier tarot decks than the Tarot de Marseille, but there's just something very truthful about reading with this. And I love the consistency among the Tarot de Marseille in the positioning of the baton cups, épée, and denier. And yeah, it's become over the years more and more comfortable. It feels more like home in picking up a deck such as this. Beautiful Ace of Swords. And the other deck from Flornoy's studio that I have in my tarot library is the Tarot of Jacques Vieville. And this is a majors only deck. And included in this deck, you have different facings for some of them are the same, but most of them face in opposite directions. And if you know anything about this deck, there is conversation about how these cards were printed and in what direction they were intended to be facing. But what I want to say here is I think it is a good exercise to practice doing majors only readings. And with the 2 versions of the major arcana, you can put together a combination of both versions and have the tarot facing in the directions that make the most sense to you. This Yves Reynaud restoration of the Tarot of Pierre Madenié is my favorite Tarot de Marseille, and one that does remain on my acrylic stand. There's something about the softer faces. I like the lines that are a little less clean. It feels older, though this deck is circa 1709. And there's some really unusual colors in this deck that appeal to me. And so this one just is, my favorite. It's my favorite, and it stays close at hand. And the colors in the background are not as white as in the Flornoy decks that I just showed you. I would describe them more as off-white. I do like the faded colors, and yet I feel very privileged to have not only this beautiful deck, but other Tarot de Marseille restorations in my library, and so I can choose to pick up and circulate others as well. This is the Tarot of Pierre Madenié. The next 2 decks also come from Yves Reynaud's shop, and this one, the Tarot of Rivesaltes, is one that is really special. It is based on the Tarot of Jean-Pierre Payen, and it is by Ben J. Gross. This deck is available, and of course, I will link all of the decks in the description box below. The unique feature of this Tarot de Marseille is its borders and its colors. The minors are color coded, and there is a degree of intensity in the borders as you move through the suit. This is a really fun deck to read with. And I want to say that, I love this deck as well too, but it has a different feel in that it is a contemporary remake of a well-loved old Tarot of Marseille. And I'll show you a few of the cards from the Tarot of Jean-Pierre Payen as well. And so this one is a little bit later, 1713. And if you love color in your deck, what Ben Gross has added here is just really something. And I suppose this deck should be in the next section. I do have other decks in the next section of contemporary Tarot de Marseille that look quite classic, and I will point those out as well too. But I'm showing you this one here because I also have here a restoration of the Tarot of Jean-Pierre Payen by Reynaud. And you can see that the colors here, the green is really lovely. It's sort of I don't know how you would describe it. It's a very grass green. It's a very classic Tarot de Marseille. And it has similar faces to the Dodal. And some people find the odd faces, and you can see it's got the same fingers as the Noblet. A little off-putting, but I think it's part of the charm of reading with the Tarot de Marseille. And here are a couple of cards just comparing these two decks. Judgment. And really interesting how that turquoise color has replaced the gray in the original deck. And you can see how the eyes, the lines of the fingers and so forth are more clearly defined. Here is the star. And with that white face in the star card, I feel like I'm looking at a mask, and maybe inclined to speak to that in terms of the healing energy of the star card and letting that mask go. And the Queen of Swords. It's interesting. She looks a little bit younger in the Tarot of Jean-Pierre Payen versus the Tarot of Rivesaltes. And then we skip ahead to about 1760, Nicholas Conver's work. And these are the only two decks I have. This is the Camoin Jodorosky deck, and on the left is Yof Bendorf's work. And so interesting considering that Bendorf was a student of Jodorosky to look and see the differences between these two decks, because they are both available mass market at a relatively reasonable price. These are great study decks for the Tarot of Marseille. And I want to say that both of these authors have tremendous guidebooks for studying these decks. And I just wish that Camoin's books were available in English. And I hope that one day they do become available. It is a little tedious reading with Google Translate. I do read French, but not fluently enough to really enjoy the book. Lovely, lovely reference book. Glossy colored pages filled with details about this work. I also have the mini version of the Jodorowsky deck, and this one was sent to me complimentary. I forget why. I think there was a mess up with my order. And I have several little mini decks that I travel with, and I love to carry this one. This is most definitely the tiniest tarot deck in my library. The next group of decks are inspired by the Tarot de Marseille, and I show you the Jonasa Jaus here because in her guidebook she writes about Jodorowsky's work and says that her deck is based on the work of Jodorosky. And so it's really can be really challenging to see that in the Jonasa Jaus. It is a beautiful deck. I believe this is the 4th edition. There are some things about this deck that this is the Tower card. The flowers in this deck are really lovely, and I think she's done a great job with them. I'll see if I can find justice for you. I pulled out the majors. And yet, in the minor arcana, there are some cards where I can easily speak to Waite-Smith meanings. And I'm going to address that a little bit later, but that's why I'm showing you the Jonasa Jaus here. The deck on the left you've already seen. This is the tarot of Pierre Madenié, and on the right is the Tarot de Marseille of Pablo Robledo, Argentina. And I'm showing you a few cards from these two decks side by side because they are very similar. And while the Tarot de Marseille is based on several different versions of the Tarot de Marseille, it has a very similar feel to the Madenié tarot. And it is a smaller size, you can see from the cards. The blues are simply stunning, and often in reading this deck, I feel like it is 3-dimensional. The lines are clearer, the skin tones are more natural. And I think this is a really good example of a restoration versus a reproduction. And I know that I have used these words interchangeably, incorrectly. The Tarot de Marseille by Pablo Robledo. It's a lovely deck to have in hand, and I love the small size of the cards. It shuffles beautifully, and it is those turquoise blues that are just stunning. You can see, right, quite a different feel from a restoration. And interesting how this one picks up on the green that we saw in the sun card in the deck on the left. So I'll just show you a few more cards from this. I would say this is another favorite. It's small, it's easy to carry, and very easy to look at. I have another 12 or so inspired by Tarot de Marseille contemporary decks, and this one is my favorite. I have had it for a long time. It is a beautiful deck, and while Lori said in her writings that this is the Tarot of the Ozarks by Lori LePage, that this is not a Tarot de Marseille, it certainly reads like one. It is true to the shapes and the arrangements of the minors. And there is a lot of hidden detail in the artwork that allows for a rather intuitive reading. And I'm thinking of, in particular, some of the swords cards where the light appears through, and I love how she has varied the objects for the suit of coins. And the colors of the backgrounds also help to bring in information, just like the floral does in the Tarot de Marseille. And this is Playing Marseille by Ryan Edward. The majors look like Tarot de Marseille. The minors, however, are marked as playing cards are. And so this is a very versatile little deck, easy to remove the major arcana and use this as a set of playing cards. Very clear. I know that you can use any tarot deck as a playing card deck by removing the major arcana and one of the court cards. However, this one looks a lot more like a playing card deck than does most tarot decks. I do like the black colors in this deck, the way that where you would often see the color blue, Ryan has chosen the color black. This one in the center is the Tarot of Maria Celia by Leonard Jim Narcisco. This is a deck that comes in a tin. Lovely purples and greens. Kind of a cartoony feel to the faces and the body proportions of the humans in the deck. It very much has a Tarot de Marseille feel. And so what appeals in this deck really is the colors to me. And I suppose it's the playfulness of the tiny humans illustrated here. The floral embellishments are lovely as well. The other tiny deck on the table is the Marshmallow Marseille by the Wandering Oracle. I think this one might be hard to find right now. I know that they have not been publishing decks as regularly as they were at one time. They also created the Tarot of the Siren. I had that at one time, but I found that I don't really appreciate the strong themes in some of the contemporary decks. And so I kept this one. I love that first moon card that I showed you. And it certainly does read like a Tarot de Marseille. Lovely tiny little deck. So there's these three, and then the one by Jess Rollar. This is the Squid Cake Marseille, and I would say that this one is pretty funky. It does not look, the minors do follow the Tarot de Marseille pattern, but all of the humans are very quirky, and the use of horses is replaced by creatures such as snails. It does have pink edges, if that's a selling point. It's a mass market deck. And I know some people like the quirky contemporary iterations of old classic decks, and I know this one is quite popular. Most of you will be familiar with the deck on the far left. It is Patrick Valenza's Trionfi della Luna, one of the original iterations of the deck. In the center is Tarocchi 23 by Midnight Tarot, and this is a really charming deck. I quite like this one. It feels very old school with a fun flair. And on the far right is Rosario Salerno's New Choice Tarot de Marseille, and this one also has some great cards. Let's start with this one. And I think the Hermit, this one also has shiny edges. The Hermit in this deck is a very well-known card. It's most definitely a queer tarot. The colors are incredible. And yet I kind of like this deck as well too. If I'm going to pick up a Contemporary de Marseille, I will choose Laurie LePage's deck, but it is more true to a Tarot de Marseille. I know people could argue with that as well. This one, I don't know. I like the colors. I like the textures of the artwork. I like some of the statements that are being made in some of the cards, and I like the inclusivity that we see in this particular deck. And I know that this is not the only queer Marseille that is out there. Another thing I like about Rosario's guidebook is the extra information on the floral details and the minor arcana. Lovely addition to the interpretation of the cards. Just look at that Two of Wands. Incredibly beautiful. I actually met somebody like this in an ashram in India. We went for a music night, and we were welcomed by somebody who looked like this. Maybe not as many colors in the clothing, but the hair. And at some point, the hair was taken down and the dreads touched the floor and trailed behind him. And I was just sort of in awe of his energy. So yeah, very, very colorful. New Choice, Tarot de Marseille. Tarocchi 23 has white backgrounds, and you may recognize the choices that are made in this deck if you are familiar with the history of the older decks. This is a deck that is inspired by Tarot de Marseille from varying centuries and locations. It is very, very charming. And the expressions on the faces of the humans and the animals are simply priceless. It has a wonderful sense of humor, and yet it also reads very well. And you can see that some of the choices here most definitely go back as far as some of the old Italian tarots and the Minchiate tarot as well. So glad he included the moon and the star and the sun in the way that he did. Papess and the Pope and the Popess. Every time I share this deck with somebody, I think to myself, oh my goodness, I need to read with this more. I need to have this out. Leave it on my acrylic stand. It's such a great deck. And Trionfi della Luna. I think this deck you can read more like a Tarot de Marseille than you can read Deviant Moon Tarot like a Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I feel that this one, while there is lots of quirkiness in this deck, and like I said with Lori LePage's deck, there's light, there's colors that come through in various ways, even blood in this one, that allows you to use your intuition and have a really good look at the way the minors are arranged. This obviously was put in order for some reason. And it's certainly not a Tarot de Marseille. It is inspired by it, and the minors, in a way, read in that fashion. And you know that in a Tarot de Marseille that there is no water pouring out of this cup. And yet I find that's a really lovely change in this card. And I know this deck does come in many, many colorations. Patrick Valenza, where would we be without his body of work in the tarot world? And I was just looking at some of these cards here and I'm thinking, all right, then I should show you this one next. This is a rather body deck. This is by Usi. It's called Tarot Eros. It is still available and it definitely has a select audience. Has a great sense of humor, lots of nipples and penises. The Two of Cups is absolutely beautiful in this deck. I have done maybe only 2 readings with this deck. It's not easy to find an audience that would appreciate a deck such as this. It has a particular mood to it, at least in the circles that I travel in. I mean, just look at this card. It's hilarious. Knight of Swords, Ace of Coins. Oh, this is the Two of Cups. That's not the card I was thinking of. This one. This is the Three of Cups. And that's not an extra card. That's the actual Three of Cups in the deck. This is Uzi's Tarot Eros. And this is Kitten Chops Pip Speak Tarot. Beautiful colors in this deck, and golds and some metallics that pop off the page. And while this looks a bit more like a Tarot de Marseille than some of the other small decks I showed you, the quirky Squid Cake Tarot de Marseille, it's a pretty quirky little deck. I'm sure you are familiar with Zara's Waite-Smith inspired deck as well. Kitten Chops Pip Speak Tarot. Great little guidebook as well too in the box. Lovely box. On the far right, I believe the creator is Oli Star Frosting. This deck reads, it is inspired by the Tarot de Marseille, yet it has a shamanic feel to it. I wish I still had the shamanic oracle. I was thinking about this when I was reading with this the other day, how I would like to do a combo reading with this deck and the shamanic tarot that has all the cave paintings in it. It just sort of has that energy, feeling kind of raw. And I wish it didn't have a border and had focused on the art more. Though, with these large off-white backgrounds, in that regard, it does feel more like a Tarot de Marseille, but you see all of the paint in between the objects of the miners. And so you're not really working with the flowers and the ribbons and so forth. There are other decks that use red for cups, and it kind of threw me when I first opened this deck about the use of red for cups, because I feel like the use of red is very root chakra and kind of hard to read with the suit of cups. And so this deck for me feels like I'm reading it in a very special way, a very intuitive way, working with all of my resources to read with this deck. Lovely star card. So it's red. It's basically red and blue. There are some purple cards. Interesting that Justice is purple if you think about the Waite-Smith, and in some of the colorations you really do see the purple veil behind Justice. This deck is still available, I believe. And last, and certainly not least, this is La Corte dei Tarocchi. It is an Il Meneghello deck by Anna Maria Donofrio. And it is just lovely, lovely to read with uncoated paper. I mean, all decks by Il Meneghello are beautiful, wonderful quality. The golds in this deck also are really something. And you'll see that in the minors, they are not arranged like a Tarot de Marseille. This feels like maybe more like an old Italian tarot. And I don't know if you can see the gold paint, but it really is beautiful. I love uncoated paper. It shuffles beautifully. I love the sound that it makes. Can you see the face here on the King of Spades? There are different embellishments on some of the cards, and so you may read something into what is above or below the minors rather than reading them how you normally would. Really interesting choice of color for the cup here. And very religious looking attire, don't you think? I've had this deck for a long time. I know it's harder to find, may even be out of print now, but people do pass it on. It's not one that is a straight up Tarot de Marseille, so it might be a little more difficult to read with. It's in Italian, of course. Coins are just really beautiful. So that's it, my friends. These are a real mishmash of restorations, contemporary iterations, indie, mass market. But I thought they all kind of fit together, and I hope that the ones I showed side by side, it made sense. Let me know if you have or read with any of these decks what your favorite one is. Love this world card. I always look forward to your comments. Take good care. Namaste.